Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Let me introduce myself. My name is Rositawati. In this video, I would like to deliver the material in the foundation of translation. There are seven material that is introduction and definition of translation, kinds of translation, translation method, translation technique, procedure of translation, the measurement of translation quality, and last is the problematic of translation. Well, let's start from the first material. Introduction and definition of translation. A translation is the process or result of transferring a text from one language into a text in another language. For example, the English language then translate into Indonesian language or vice versa. Kinds of translation. Basically, Kate Ford in 1974 on page 16 mentioned three types of translation. There are word-for-word translation. Word-for-word translation is the translation that translates every word for word in a sentence. And then literal translation. The translators has to bear in mind the basic principle of literature. And then last is free translation. In the free translation, it is used to translate phrases, proverbs, and idiomatic. And translation method. And the translation method consists of 8 methods. There are word-for-word translation, free translation, literal translation, faithful translation, idiomatic translation, semantic translation, adaptive translation, and the last is communicative translation. And then the next material is translation method. Translation technique. In the translation technique, divide into two types technique. This direct technique and then indirect technique. In the direct technique consists of three technique. That is borrowing technique, calque technique, and literal technique. And then in the indirect technique consists of 12 technique. There are transposition technique, modulation technique, adaptation technique, compensation technique, description technique, discursive creation technique, stabilized equivalency technique, generalization technique, particularization technique, variation technique, reduction technique, and then substitution technique. And then the next material is procedure translation. Translation procedures are used when the translators formulate equivalency in transferring a message from the search language to the target language. And then the measurement of translation quality. Measuring the quality of translation is important in science. Is important in science of translation because it will affect the translator. For example, of the field of work or business. And then the last material is the problematic of translation. The problematic of translation such as expression and idiom, compound words, the use of two-word verb, missing name in translation, the structure of language, and then last is any five or six. The last is multiple meaning in translation. Six. Six the problematic of translation. Okay, that's all the material in foundation of translation. There are seven material. Okay, that's all the explanation from me. Thank you for your attention. And last I say, wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.